Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar on Google Analytics, specifically for business-to-business marketers. This is Claire Lemke speaking, and I'm a Senior User Experience Designer at KW2. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on Google Analytics, and today we're going to be covering goal and event creation with specifically Google Tag Manager. But the ideas and concepts apply to any tag manager or analytics system that you're going to be working with. But we do cover some specifics to help you get started. Last time we covered the steps on creating a measurement plan. So if you're just joining us now, we highly recommend checking that out as well when you get a chance, because there's a lot of foundational information in there that will help too. So before we get started, just a little bit about us. KW2 and Earthling Interactive have partnered up for this webinar series. KW2 is a full-service advertising agency, meaning we cover all aspects of marketing and branding, from naming and logo development to ad creation, large-scale local and national media buying, and then the entire digital service set as well. So website and app design, content strategy, SEO, you name it. And Earthling Interactive is a development partner of ours, and they work in web applications, mobile apps, and websites. They work with B2B clients, large-scale manufacturing, high-tech startups, and e-commerce businesses. And our two firms have partnered together on quite a few projects. So who's speaking? Again, I'm Claire, Senior User Experience Designer. My colleague Allison Trapp joins us, and she is a Senior User Experience Designer as well. And we also have Tom Kuplick, VP of Business Services for Earthling.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, this is Tom Kuplick of Earthling Interactive. As Claire said, we're a custom website, custom web application, custom mobile application development firm in Madison, Wisconsin. We largely help companies kind of undergo their own digital transformation, where they might have all kinds of different digital properties in place that aren't working very well together, and they need either a new website to integrate more closely with some of those applications, or they need their services to kind of align internally so that they can get the most use out of all of those pieces. And that's something we've worked quite a bit with a lot of B2B companies on.
Awesome. So finally, who are you? On the line, we have marketing managers, coordinators, and VPs from financial institutions, manufacturing companies, and small businesses, and quite a range in between. And what unites all of us today is this need to understand how our websites are performing against our business goals and objectives. So today we're going to guide you through the process of creating goals and events in Google Tag Manager, which will allow you to track what micro and macro conversion activities your users are taking on your website. If what I just said sounds like gibberish, definitely check out part 1 of the series, where we explain micro and macro conversions, and we talk in detail through examples of each of those and why they're so important to track and to measure. And just a reminder about our May 30th webinar, which is the last in this series. There we're going to cover something that's really important to all of us as well, which is how to calculate the ROI of your marketing efforts using those goals and events that we have set up.
All right, so in our first webinar in this series, as Claire mentioned, we walk you through the process of creating a measurement plan. So today we're actually going to take that one step further and show you some practical strategies and tools for bringing that measurement plan to life. And we're going to start with understanding a little bit more about Google Analytics events and goals. So we covered this last time, so this might be a refresher for some of you, but a quick recap here. Goals are those larger conversions for your organization. So those are going to be your macro conversions, whatever the biggest of big conversions for your organization are. Events are used primarily to track interactions with your site. So a lot of the times those are on-click interactions, but they can be other things as well. And those can be either micro or macro conversions. So for example, if you have a third-party form that is your lead generation form and it actually takes you off-site, A click on that button would be an event, but then you'd also set that up as a goal because it's a major conversion for your organization. We have 4 different types of goals, and these can all be set up through Google Analytics. There's a destination goal, which tracks a view of a specific page. So that could be something like a thank you page after a user has submitted a lead generation form. Duration and pages per session goals measure user engagement with your site. So it's either as the amount of time users spend on the site, so you can have a target for that, or a target for the number of pages that they visit. So if somebody visits more than 4 or 5 pages, they're a highly engaged user. And as I mentioned, any event can be turned into a goal, which you would want to set up for those events that actually match up with your macro conversions. Events can track almost any interaction with your site. So as I mentioned, a lot of the time that's going to be clicks on links, clicks on buttons, clicks on specific elements on your site. But you can also track a lot of other things with events. You can track video plays, especially if you're using YouTube. So Google Tag Manager is defaults to using YouTube, but you can also set this up if you use Vimeo instead. So you can track whether a user starts, completes, or pauses a video. You can track scroll depth, so you can see if a user makes it down to the bottom of your content or the bottom of your page. You can track form submissions, so any form that is submitted on your site, you can track whether or not that was submitted, and that might be something you turn into an event goal. You can also track page views, which is actually how we connect Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. Or with the help of a developer, you can set up pretty much any event that you like. So a lot of these are right out of the box with Google Tag Manager, but custom events you can pretty much do on any specific element. So both events and goals really just give you that extra layer of data over what analytics provides by default and can lead you to insights about your users' behavior that can actually help you make decisions about your website or marketing efforts. So if you attended our first webinar, these will look a little bit familiar to you, but Claire is going to walk us in a few minutes through some examples for creating events. So I wanted to remind you of our 2 representative organizations, Net, which is a client of ours who helps large retailers with complex IT and connectivity projects. One of their goals was to increase warm leads for their sales team. So a bit of a softer goal for the website, but their organization as a whole was looking to increase those warm leads. Last time we walked through their measurement plan. So we have our overall goal of increasing warm leads, which on the website translates into increasing lead form fills and also supporting that with a content marketing strategy that shows that they're experts in their field. All these items in gold here are KPIs, so those are the actual metrics that we would set up as events or goals on the site. So that's just a reminder of Net's measurement plan. We also took a look at another example, which was Radius Bank, which is not a client, but they're an online-only bank, and one of their goals is to grow their business banking customer base. So for that goal, they wanted to increase applications, online applications, as makes sense for their website, as well as cross-sell other products and educate prospects about the benefits of an online-only bank, since they know that can be a barrier. So again, here in gold, we have all of the things that Radius Bank would set up as events or goals on their site, those KPIs that they want to measure. So that's just our 2 examples. And keep those in mind as Claire walks us through setting up an event strategy.
Okay, so yeah, now that we have a picture of where we want to go with this, let's talk about that event creation strategy. So in this section, I will cover all the elements that you'll need to include when you're setting up an event and why, a guide to thinking about your events and how to structure them, plus a tip for keeping it all straight. And then Allison is going to give us a quick overview of how Tag Manager works before Tom then walks us through measurement across multiple platforms and the importance of doing so. So first, let's talk about what goes into each event. There are 4 components of each, and I'll just list them here. Each of these 4 elements is really important to think about before you create any of your events. So keeping consistent and well thought out is really key to helping you organize your data. If you plan well, you will have really good reports later. And if you don't plan these things out, the data can be kind of a mess, and it's really hard to see things working from a high level. So the first element is the category. Categories help you group similar topic areas or concepts together, as do actions. So you can see how events on your site are doing by your business category, or by the type of content. So for example, videos or articles, or by the area of your site, or by which action is taken. So a click, a video play, use of a tab, or things like that. Next are labels, which help you identify where the event took place. And this can be a high-level label, such as your website's header or footer, or it can get really detailed, and we'll go through a way to plan those out as well. And then the event value is an optional field. You can set up events without a value, and for now you might want to do that until after our Part 3 webinar on setting values and calculating ROI. But we do highly recommend taking this step as soon as you feel ready to do so, because it can help you determine the true ROI or ROAS, which is return on ad spend of your marketing. And it's one high-level metric that really all stakeholders can get behind and care about. So we're going to be talking more about why each of those is important, but there are 2 main ways to measure the value of your efforts. One is ROI, which is return on investment, and that's going to include all of your investments like time, overhead, not just hard costs. And then ROAS, return on ad spend, is a metric that you can use to optimize things like email campaigns, Facebook ads, paid search. So now that we've covered those, how do you know what your category, label, and action should be? So really, event naming and categorization is entirely up to you. There's no right way to do it, and at the end of the day, the thing that matters is that you understand what your data is telling you. So you understand how things are grouped, how they're categorized, so that when your stakeholders have a question, you can answer it. Like, how many people play our videos, or how many people played this specific video, or does anybody actually click on that 3rd tab? People go to our FAQ page, but do they open up the answers? Those are all questions that usually can't be answered from Google Analytics just out of the box, but can definitely be answered in high level and great detail if you have events set up properly. So the 2 sentence structures on this slide are going to help us organize our thoughts about what event tracking is really trying to tell us. So if we want to know how many people use the social media icons in the site's footer, we might say something like this first sentence. So David clicked the social media icon in our site footer to get to our Facebook page. So in this situation, the action is going to be click, the category is social media, and then the label is footer. So what this lets you do is say you also have social media links on your Contact Us page. That would change this slightly to say the category is still social media, the action is still click, then that label might be Contact Us. So you can start to see how you could group everything that people are doing with the social media icons or links, but from a different lens or from different parts of your site. And then the second example, say we care about how many people are using our videos to learn more about us. So our sentence here is, Sally played a video about business banking services. So here again, the category is that business grouping that we talked about, so business banking. And then the action that she did is she played, and the label is video. So if you care how people are interacting with your videos in general, you might have different categories like business banking, personal banking, maybe insurance if you have insurance products. And then, if you care about looking at that lens of everything related to business banking, then your label might change from video to article to case study. So that's kind of a way to help us start to think about how to organize these concepts. So let's walk through our 2 examples, because I think seeing the pictures is always really helpful, more helpful for me than talking about it theoretically. So categories are used, again, to compare interactions against each other. You can create categories really any way that makes sense for your organization, but it's important to keep them consistent. So here we have the category as case studies with an S. It's really important to not go back and forth between case study singular and case studies plural, because at the end of the day, Google Analytics will report those as separate categories. So when you try and just get a sum for all of those actions, you'll have to go in and manually add things. And all of us know that when you're looking at data, whether it's only a few data points or a lot of data points, the last thing you want to do is go through and tally things up manually month after month. So Net wants to know how people interact with their case studies and how likely those actions are to bring in new business. So again, our category here is case studies. An action is exactly what it sounds like. It describes how the user interacted with a piece of content. So actions can be looked at independently from categories. So you could track all clicks or all plays regardless of the category. And here we're tracking read 80%. And what that means is that we've set up different markers at different vertical lines throughout this page. So when somebody gets to about 80% of the content, that is going to trigger our event to fire to show us how far down in this article somebody got, or on the page rather. So say you want to make sure that people are reading most of your content or getting really deep into the articles, and you have, a newsletter subscription bar down at the bottom and then your site footer. Knowing that somebody read 80% of the page rather than just, 20, 30, 40% helps you understand how deep they're getting into this content. And then finally, label. So labels give us more information for events that you want to track, such as the name of a file downloaded, the person's name of an email address that was clicked, or a specific phone number for one of your departments. So a label can be a page name, and we'll show you how to make that happen without having to create one event for every single page on your site or every single PDF that people can download, because that could get really, really messy over time. And in this example, we're using these double brackets to dynamically insert the name of the page that the event occurred on. These are called variables, and Allison is going to cover this later. So putting that all together, we have the category, which is case studies. The action is read 80%. And then finally, our label, you can see here, is the name of this specific case study, which was dynamically entered because of the page where that event occurred. So then next up is our example from Radius Bank. Oops, sorry about that. So they care about how people are interacting with business banking content and promotions. So our category is business banking. We want to track interactions with these business promos. So our action here is click promo, but specifically, which promo are people interacting with? Are they clicking on online banking? Are they clicking on business lending or cash management? So this is an example where you could use this specific event to optimize something like an email marketing campaign, specifically for people who are most likely to click on this business lending promo rather than the others. So when you put this all together, you can see how you'd use that data down the road. So the category is business banking. The action, again, is click promo. And then our page that this happened on is dynamically inserted there. You could also dynamically insert the specific name of that promotion. So I'm going to pause here to stress the importance of planning out your events in advance. And I've said it before, keeping the category and action names straight is so important to making sure that you have something that you can filter on in the future. So you don't want to set all these things up and then later find out that you have to, like I said, manually add together video and videos data, or that sometimes video is your category and sometimes video is the label. So in our previous webinar, we created a measurement plan, which is the key to making sure that you know what your events and goals are going to be measuring, and that when your stakeholders have those questions that you understand what to track to be able to answer those. So once we have that approved measurement plan, we generally make a spreadsheet to keep everything straight as we set up all these goals and events. So you can use, a spreadsheet, Google Sheets, a piece of paper, whatever works for you. Whatever it is, it's going to help make sure that you don't miss any of your events and goals, and that your naming is consistent, and that you can pivot the data how you need to. So here's an example of a spreadsheet that we might use to help set up our events for NET. So here again, we can just see that we've got our categories all in one column. We've got our actions there, and there we can kind of double check. Okay, so in the action column, I have multiple actions that are called click. So in Google Analytics, when we look at our events, we can see all of the click events that happen. So now that we've gone through the anatomy of an event and how to set ourselves up for success later, Allison is going to take us through an overview of Google Tag Manager.
All right, thanks, Claire. So I'm going to walk us through the basic components of Tag Manager. And Tag Manager is a completely free tool made by Google that can give your non-technical team members greater control over tracking data on your site. This is really nice because, no offense to our friend Tom over here, but it means that you really only have to get a developer involved at the beginning, and then you can add and create and modify events as you add new content or as your site changes. So it really does give you a lot of control over what you're measuring on your site. Today we're going to primarily talk about how it can help you track your website metrics using analytics, Google Analytics, but it also integrates with many other marketing, sales, and customer support platforms to help you get a 360-degree view of all of your data. And Tom's going to talk a little bit more about that and extending this idea out to other parts of the digital ecosystem. So there are two key components to Tag Manager: triggers, which is the action that causes the tag to fire, and tag, which is the piece of code that records data about the trigger's action. There's a third major component of Tag Manager that's variables, as Claire mentioned. These aren't required, but they can be really, really helpful for getting additional information into your tags. So starting with triggers, a trigger is really any action on your site that causes one of those tags to fire. Usually these are on-click interactions, as I mentioned, but they can be a lot of different types of interactions as well. So in addition to tracking clicks on any site element, you can track if users are playing videos, scrolling to a specific point in the page, submitting a form, or even just viewing a page. You'll notice that these look really similar to what events can do on your website. That's because a trigger and an event are kind of, they're synonymous topics. So anything that you want an event to do, you will need to set up a trigger to do that. The next component is a tag, and as I mentioned, a tag is a piece of code that records information, and then it passes that information back from your site into analytics or another platform. So today we're focusing mostly on Google Analytics, but there are a lot of different types of tags you can set up through Tag Manager. So you can set things up with your advertising platforms like Google Ads, or social platforms like LinkedIn or Facebook, or even if you're doing usability testing on your website, it integrates with platforms like Optimize and Hotjar. So there are a ton of different types of tags. If you log into Tag Manager, I believe there are almost 100 different options of platforms that you can integrate with. So there's a lot of different choices there. Our final component of Tag Manager is a variable, and it's a placeholder for a value that will change, like a video name or the text someone clicked on, or it can be a placeholder for a constant, like your Google Analytics ID. When you go into the Tag Manager platform, you do have to use your Google Analytics ID every time you set up a tag, so it can be really helpful to set up a variable so you don't have to enter that number over and over again. When Claire was talking us through her strategy for setting up an event for NET, the label was a variable for page URL. And that is how we were able to just set up one event to track an interaction that happens on many, many pages across that site. So variables are not required, but they can really be helpful, especially in decreasing the amount of work that you have to do when you're setting this up. So I'm not going to go through the exact mechanics of setting up tags today because that can get a little bit complicated for a pre-lunch webinar, but we have some resources on our website to help you get started. I do want to talk you through the process of connecting Tag Manager to your website because that can be something that's kind of a confusing concept and we want to make sure that's really clear. So first, you're going to visit the Tag Manager site and create a new account for your site, just like you would have done when you first set up analytics. Next, and this is really the only time you're going to need a developer or from your IT team, you'll need to get the container code that's provided by Tag Manager and have your developer place that on your website. So that's the one real developer step. Although while they're in there, you should also ask them to remove any existing Google Analytics code. A lot of the times when people are setting up Tag Manager for the first time, they also have Google Analytics already installed. And so you want to get that cleared out to prevent any double tracking. The final step is to connect Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics, and you do that by creating a tag, which is a page view tag. So that's really the kind of 4 to 5 step process for setting up Tag Manager. It's pretty simple, and we do have some guides on our site for helping you get that started. It can seem a little overwhelming at first, but it really can be completed in under 5 minutes with very little help. So as I mentioned, we have some resources on our site that you can use if you want to get started with creating tags. This Tag Manager guide has how to get started, how to set up that first page view tag, and how to set up a lot of different common types of tags. Or if you prefer, we also have videos, if you're more of a visual learner, that walk you through all those steps. So those are available on our website, and we will send out the slides after this presentation with those links so you have access to those. So in addition to using Tag Manager, which is a really great tool for getting more out of your data, I'm also going to talk you through a few other practical strategies for getting the most out of that Google Analytics information. Analytics can tell you a lot right out of the box, but there are several ways you can optimize it to get better, cleaner data out of it. Everything I'm going to mention here is free and available in Google Analytics, but does require someone on your team to set it up. It's not just set up by default. All right, so understanding your users is definitely a key part of understanding how your website's working. So Google Analytics can tell you a lot about your users without any intervention, but it's not always going to tell you something meaningful, like whether or not your visitor is actually a prospect or not. You can find out more about your users by doing things like filtering out internal traffic and creating segments. So a lot of times we'll see folks having their internal traffic just mixed in with external traffic. An easy way to learn more about your customers is to just filter out your own internal traffic because your organization probably is one of the heavier users of your website. You can also get more information about your users by creating Google Analytics audiences based on certain on-site behavior. So if a user visits a page that's targeted as a prospect, you can trigger off of that and say, we think this user is a prospect, and create an audience based on that user. And that'll give you a lot more information that then you can extend into other platforms like Google Ads. Another thing you can do is enabling Google's demographics and interest reports. So those reports will give you things like age, gender, interests, based on Google's own advertising data. You'll also want to learn what is actually driving users to your site. And Google has a lot of tools for determining where users are coming from, your acquisition channels. But there are ways that you can get a little bit more information. We recommend using Google's campaign URL builder every single time you send out a link to your site. It can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. It's an extra step that you have to take, but you can get so much information out of it through emails, social channels. Even if you're using print and a link shortener, you can still use a campaign URL. So that gives you a lot of additional detail on what's working and what isn't for all of your different marketing efforts. Another thing that you can do is to set up cross-domain tracking. So we talked a little bit about having access to third-party sites. So if you do have a third-party commerce platform or a third-party CRM that you're sending users to, and you have access to that, you can set up cross-domain tracking in Google Analytics so that you can track the user throughout their entire interaction with all of your properties. So Tom's going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's a great thing to do if you have access to additional properties. Another thing you can do is Google does now kind of hide a lot of our keyword data from us. It's too bad, but it's for a good reason. It's for privacy reasons. So setting up Search Console, which is another Google product, and linking Google Ads and Analytics can give you extra keyword data. So that can be really, really valuable because not only do you see keywords that are driving users to your site, but you can see keywords that you appeared in the search for and then users did not actually click through to your site. So that can give you some ideas of where you might be able to optimize your content better. We've talked a lot about events today, and most of what we're going to talk about today is making sense of that on-site behavior beyond just what users are actually looking at to get their actual interactions with the site. So I'm not going to go into events in great detail right now since we've talked about those a lot, but there are a few other things that you can do on your site to learn a little bit more about user behavior. It has its own search. You can set up search tracking in your site settings. So this gives you some valuable keyword data for the search box on your own website. And it can actually tell you if users are having a hard time with your navigation, for example. So if you have a section on your site called solutions and you notice a lot of users are searching for the term services, that might give you a clue that maybe it's time to reconsider that navigation name and change it to a label that for what users are actually looking for. So you can get a lot of detail from this. It can tell you what content is hard for users to find. It can also tell you what content you might want to develop for the future if you don't actually have the thing they're searching for. You can also create custom content groupings, and that just allows you to group pages by themes or intended audiences. If you've ever used Google Analytics, you know that a lot of its default methods of grouping things together are based on the actual page URL, so the section that the page is in. But a lot of times for our websites, we have content that's targeted at a lot of different types of users across the site, and you want to actually group things together that aren't in the same section. So that basically just says, if you have content targeted at a specific audience that falls across your site in different site sections, you can group those together and have a group called, say, prospect pages that will give you more information on how that content's performing. So lastly, I'm going to come around to our first webinar, and really we just want to make sure that you're tracking your biggest organizational goals. If you get nothing else from this webinar series, set up a few goals. It really does give you additional information and lets you know how things are going. For most of you, that's going to mean setting up goals and goal funnels. But if you do sell products on your site, that means enabling e-commerce settings so that you can actually track how your site is performing. So hopefully that's already in place if you are selling products, or if you do have those big macro goals that maybe aren't about selling but are about converting warm leads. But that's really, really key to set up to get additional information. All right, so I'm going to click out of this wonderful Fiery Drivers notification and hand it over to Tom, who's going to talk about extending these ideas throughout your entire digital ecosystem.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks, Claire. This is Tom Kuplick from Earthling Interactive, and one of the great things about Google Tag Manager is that it does allow you to kind of take the reins on a lot of the kind of implementation of code on your website. After all, Tag Manager is a snippet of code that kind of creates a window or a door into the site. But key to that, I think, is actually doing a little bit of planning. And so while you may eventually want to avoid your IT department for all these little requests, it would be important at the very beginning to have a sit-down meeting a kumbaya moment if your marketing and IT are split and not always working together, or just a refreshing little meeting because you love each other and you want to see each other. But either way, marketing and IT do need to have a sit down before you do the implementation. You kind of need to get everyone on the same page. Sometimes there is some resistance to adding code to different parts of different products that you have on your website, or maybe you have an application that's also a key business driver, and what you want to do is track people from one point to another. As Allison said, that cross-domain traffic tracking for Google Tag Manager does work, but you do need to have code on that application that also receives the user session when they're moving between a site and an application. So that requires IT to implement that on maybe a special application. So it's important for marketing and IT to get in the room together, understand what the shared goals are. So those goals and business objectives that were driven from those shareholder meetings at the very beginning, helping them understand that this is an organizational objective and it's very important. But then IT also needs to sort of walk, I think, marketing and the other folks through what the effort is that's going to be needed to do this. Sometimes it sounds very easy, and it can be easy, and then other places it can be a little bit more difficult. So you have to have a very clear understanding of what's going to be easy to implement, what are the barriers to implementation, and one of the ways that you can kind of walk into that meeting and feel a little bit more confident is to understand the stacks. So this is the tech language a lot of the times. You want to know a little bit about what kind of technology you're using. Most people talk in the tech world in terms of front end and back end when it comes to websites. So they'll be talking in the front end about JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, back end, SQL, PHP, Java, .NET. The most common website stacks that people are sort of familiar with might be sort of spoken of in acronyms like LAMP. So if you want to really impress your IT friends, ask if you're on a LAMP stack, or maybe you have WINS. So that would be either the Linux, Apache, MySQL, or Maria database with Perl, Python, or PHP running the server side, or you might have a Windows environment and have .NET, Microsoft SQL Server. But either way, if you have an understanding of what your stacks are, and you can have IT kind of help you understand that, and you want to bring that kind of question to IT, you can impress them. But it's also an important way for you to know, maybe you've got one of those a custom application that has been built and supports a very critical business function. Implementing cross-domain traffic tracking on that and implementing some tracking in that environment is going to require a little bit more IT support in terms of the different pieces that you're going to be tracking. You may not be tracking traditional page views. You might actually be tracking more event-based interactions on a single page application. So it's important for IT to have some kind of understanding of what you're trying to do. And for marketing, I think that is an important place for you to maybe drive a more analytically oriented view in the organization. So it's another place where marketing can play a really strong role in helping people make data-driven decisions and implement analytics across a lot of different properties and really drive some of those discussions for the organization. Close to home, I think what marketers can do is think about their own stack. What's their digital marketing stack? Maybe use this in quotes because the tech people might think that you're co-opting their terms, and you are, but that's fine. Really what you're sort of thinking about are what are all the tech tools that we have in our arsenal as marketers that are being used. We have, your CMS or content management system. Many people use WordPress. Maybe you've got .NET Nuke or Magento, the analytics tools and the tag manager tools. Maybe you have email that you're using and a CRM or a marketing automation tool, social automation tool that you use to post things, and it's got its own little URLs, and you're trying to implement something that's consistent. You have lead capture tools, webinar tools, calendar tools if people are booking appointments or sales calls, video streaming tools for people that are going to watch how-tos. You've got A/B testing tools maybe that you're using on your website to see which forms or which lead pages are working the best. And maybe you actually have people sign contracts and you notice that there's some actual kind of funnel activity that happens when people are sent to a contract language, and you want to see whether or not that's actually going to be fulfilled when somebody is sent to that. But this is your digital marketing stack. And the important thing to understand about this is who's using this, right? Like, who's using any one of these tools? Are they connected to your website directly? Are people linking off of that website? Are you sending people there via email? What are the means by which people are interacting with these tools currently? And are they 1-2 degrees away from their website? Is there one central place that they're being directed? Are the people who are using these just keeping track of analytics just within one viewpoint, like within the email? They're only looking at their email analytics. They're not looking at any big picture analytics tied together to this. So you're really trying to get an understanding, are you in isolated silos as an organization with each one kind of the pirate captain of their own little ship? Or you have a naval fleet that's actually working together. And one of the things you can kind of think about is, you know, what's a way to kind of bring that pirate ship group into a kind of more cohesive vision for what you're trying to accomplish, and you yourself just be able to look at the analytics from some of those different entities and have those people who are doing their own thing keep doing their own things, but at least allow you to bridge and understand the different work that's going on in email, going on in that contract signature place. So the key point here is to really get a firm understanding and list everything off from your marketing stack. And then what this is going to help you understand how to do is can you connect these critical pieces. So what your website does is it's locks off on a button when it goes to a booking software. So somebody who's going to book an appointment, or somebody who's going to actually maybe time with somebody. Are they doing that on a third-party application that will allow us to put tag tagger on that application and see if there's version for an entire type of coaching or an entire type of appointments to understand the other thing that any business alone is going to be a different type of appointment than a customer is doing consumer loan. So understanding those types of products that you have as a software or other calendars can help you understand whether or not you can actually get real level of data on the type of conversion that's happening. In the best case, it does allow you to do that, and you can get really specific in data. In the worst case, it just, you know, you're actually probably tracking traffic on a button from your website, and you're having to make some sort of adjusted average value for that FaceTime data from the previous year. And Allison will be covering a lot of that in the next webinar, but you kind of really have to have a clear understanding of what's possible with these connections to, if it's a booking software or if it's appointment scheduling, or maybe have a quoting system. Any one of these can be third-party applications, and really what you want to have is a firm understanding either from your tech team that built it or from the tech team at that third-party software about what's possible in the way that you can track this data. Knowing all of these things, you're going to come up with a really clean implementation plan, because what you want to have marketing and IT do is really clean up and have a firm understanding of what your implementation plan is going to be for how you're actually going to do this. So you had some maybe pie in the sky discussions of all the things that you wanted to track and the granularity in which you're going to track it and how it's going to feed into your CRM and how you're going to have these embedded forms. And here's where you have a kind of reality check of what is possible. And if it isn't possible, what's the next best thing that we can track? It doesn't mean you have to throw up your hands and say, well, there's no way we can track that. There's probably some accommodation you can make, and it's just having a clear-eyed view of what that accommodation is and what kind of value you can add to whatever is not the granular detail that you had hoped for. So either way, it's all possible to get good data from this. Sometimes it's possible to get actual great data, like e-commerce conversion level, quoting system, right to the consumer one-to-one. You can do automated marketing specifically to that person. You live in a great world if you can do that. Many of us don't have that ability, and so really what we're trying to do is just get better data for better decision making. So the next webinar is actually going to be something that Claire will talk a little bit more about, and that is, you know, getting a real understanding of how to kind of track this to values.
Yeah, so we talked earlier about how, you know, setting up all these events along the pathway to a larger conversion. You know, like Tom said, whether that happens on your site, on a site that you can track, or if you're just simply tracking people's exits out to perhaps that third-party software. What we're doing is basically laying all the groundwork for you to be able to see which actions lead up to one of those larger conversions, and basically how likely somebody who, for example, clicked on your case study title is to ultimately convert, and whether that changes based off of which case study you're talking about. So then, you know, once you've laid all that groundwork through setting up these events and goals, then you'll be able to say, okay, now how many of these people came in through paid ads, email marketing, perhaps remarketing, retargeting, or organic search, for example. And then you can really start to see the true value and ROI, or even ROAS, from all of the channels where you're marketing, ultimately to each of those events and goals along the pathway. So that's what we're going to be covering in great detail next time. So calculating that ROI and understanding the value of all the interactions that can take place on your site. So please join us for May 30th, which is our third and final webinar of this series. And we'll have an email that we'll send out about an hour from now that's going to have a landing page with information about that webinar. If you haven't already registered, it's definitely not too late. Feel free to forward that information to a colleague of yours as well, especially if you know somebody who would be perfect for using this on their website. So now it looks like we have just a couple of minutes for questions and answers before we wrap things all up. So I'm just going to check over and see if there are any questions that have popped in. All right, and so someone has asked, can you explain why variables are so important? Are variables helpful? Why should I use them specifically? So Allison, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, variables are completely optional. You don't have to use variables. All you need in Tag Manager to actually set up an event is a trigger and a tag. But as you can see from just the examples we've gone over today, you can get so much more information if you use variables. So variables can tell you what the specific text someone clicked on is. So if you have specific language that you're testing and you want to know if a button that says get started now works better than a button that says start now, you can actually test that through just looking at your event tracking and looking at what that click text is. You can track video titles of the videos that are played, what pages things occurred on, what pages users are clicking to. So variables really just give you a lot of additional information about what's happening with your events without the need for you to set up a lot of different events to track things in a really discrete fashion. So it's more of a time savings for you, as well as just giving you a lot more valuable data so you can really see at a granular level what's happening on the site.
Great. Yeah, so we hope that that answered that question about variables. The next one here is, how do you recommend we use audiences in analytics? The tool seems useful, but we haven't understood an application for it yet. So do you want to take that one too, Allison?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So audiences are it's a really excellent tool. It's a newer Google tool. And right now, you can use it in a few different ways. So you can essentially set up an audience in analytics based on any sort of criteria that you would be able to track in analytics. So you can set up an audience based on demographics, which is very similar to how segments are set up in analytics. So you could look at where users are coming from, their age, things like that. You could set it up that way. You can also set it up based on behavior, which I think is the more valuable way to use audiences, because then you can say, okay, we've got these specific landing pages and we want to know what these users look like because they're targeted at a specific audience. And then we can say, okay, we're going to set up an audience off of users who visited these pages, or we're going to set up an audience based off of users who converted. And then you can use those, carry those over into Google's advertising platforms. So you can actually use those to create a lookalike audience in Google Ads. So you can target your marketing efforts at users who are similar to users who already converted on your site. So that's a really valuable thing that you can do. You can pull those over into Google's own advertising platforms, of course. You can also just use that data outside of analytics or Google's advertising platform to take a look at what types of users are converting. So it can be something that is a technical integration that you can actually bring over to Google Ads and use in that way, or you can just use it to get smarter about your users. So it's a really great tool. Highly recommend checking it out. It's not difficult to set up, and it can be extended into a lot of other marketing platforms like Google Ads or your social efforts.
All right. Well, looks like that does it. So thanks again for joining us today. If you have more questions, definitely feel free to send me an email. And then check out the link again that we're going to be sending out to all of the attendees for today. about an hour from now. So you'll have the presentation slides as well as information on that upcoming webinar for the end of May. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.